And so I'm going to talk about coming to our senses both literally, because really, how do we know anything except through the senses? And even science, all scientific instruments are an extension of the senses, whether they're telescopes or microscopes or spectrophotometers or seismometers or whatever it is, or thermometers. They're all extensions of the senses. And the only way there's any possibility of knowing is to know through the senses. And the Buddhists throw in, of course, that something that we tend to ignore, although more and more we're not, and more we're interested in it, but the mind as a sense. Because without the mind, you wouldn't know what you were seeing. You wouldn't know, not just what you were seeing, you wouldn't know that you were seeing. In a sense, there wouldn't be seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. We have to connect, otherwise we miss huge swaths of our life. Why? Because we're preoccupied with what's going on in the mind. When people hear that meditation is really about the cultivation of attention, very often the first thing that pops into their mind is, wow, that must have some applicability to attention deficit disorder. And I go, yeah, it might. And attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Yeah, it might. And then I like to say, from the perspective of the meditative traditions, our entire society has attention deficit disorder, big time. And all you need to do is look, and you'll see that the mind is here and there and everywhere, all over the place, interrupting itself constantly. And also always on the way someplace else. Have you noticed that? I mean, you don't even need to be a meditator to notice that your mind is always on the way to someplace else. And did I do something? No. Most of the time, it loves to hang out in the future, trying to arrange things to be a certain way, or worrying about how they're going to not wind up that way. And so that's like driving your car with the brake on. A huge amount of burning goes on, worrying. And then when you're not worrying, you're planning. That offensive? Okay. I'll put it in my pocket. We'll see if it likes that better. Okay. And then, of course, there's always the past. And in the meditative traditions, they like to emphasize a lot being with things as they are. So, that sounds reasonable. Let's just be with things are. Be with things the way they are, as long as they're the way I want them to be. If we're going to be with things, I mean, it might as well be the way the way we want them to be, because otherwise it's going to be agony. So a lot of time we make sort of this compact that, well, we'll be with things as they are as long as we can make sure that they're the way we need them to be. And of course, in order for that to happen, we have to continually operate on the future so that we ensure that it will be that way, and continually run from what we don't want out of the past that has been harmful or awful or whatever it is. And in the process, if we're not careful, the present moment gets severely squeezed. And with it, all of those inter-embedded availabilities that we have for actually recognizing that we are more whole than not, no matter what we're carrying. And the word to suffer in Latin means to carry. And when we don't recognize our wholeness, then, of course, we're completely caught up in the demons of it not being right, and if only it were right, or it will never be right, so to just recognize that awareness can hold all of that and isn't caught by it is one of these orthogonal shifts. And nothing needs to change. We're not talking about fixing anything, making anything better, or curing, getting back to some other state where it was all okay then. And that's what I want. I want it to be the way it was then. But instead, healing, which means, in my book, coming to terms with things just as they are. And how can we know how things are just as they are? unless we start to really pay attention, and to pay attention in an open-hearted way to the full range of our capacities and resources for learning, for growing, as I was saying, for healing, and for transformation, and for adventuring, for living the life that's actually ours to live, as if it really mattered, and as if those elements that are deepest and best and most beautiful in us are actually already whole, and they are. And those 16,000 people who've been through the stress reduction program discover that on their own. We don't give sermons about it or lectures about it. You find it out in your cells, in your bones, in your heart beating, in your discomfort in your body, during the body scan, or sitting meditation, or yoga, or whatever it is. So, in brief, you could say that meditation, and in particular mindfulness, is the cultivation of, is coming to our senses, literally, and seeing if we can sustain our awareness of one or another experience. Because you know full well, if you just take eating as an example, you can eat a whole meal. You remember we eat raisins, as like the first meditation in the stress reduction clinic is often eating a raisin, one. Takes quite a while. But you know that you can eat an entire meal without tasting anything. Because in a sense, we're eating our ideas, and we're caught up in habits and conditioning from the past that, has us eating with no awareness, talking with no awareness, hearing with no awareness. Just think, how many of you have ever had the experience of somebody who you love deeply and who lives with you say to you, "You never listened to me." That ever happened to anybody here in this room? You never listened to me. And of course, you immediately would tend to get defensive and say, "What are you talking about? I'm always listening to you. I hear everything you say." Well, you do and you don't. We're very selective in our hearing. Yes, it's coming in through the ears, but no, maybe you don't allow it in because it's not coming in the way that you need it to come. Okay? And so we'll only let certain things in if it comes my way. And then we generate this whole story of what my way is, although a lot of the time we don't know, but we know we want it. We tell our kids, you can't always have your own way. But we want don't we always want our way? I mean, it's like, we make that bargain. We'll be happy, we'll be with things as they are, as long as they're pretty much the way we want them to be and can handle them. So imagine if you were to just really open it up and drop more into a comfort zone of awareness. We've been so conditioned to be in critical thinking. I mean, I remember when I went to school, some of you have heard me say this, but of course I'm always saying the same thing. I mean, I never say anything different. There's just different ways of saying the same thing. But I remember very clearly when I would ask in junior high school, why do I have to learn this? Whether it's, geometry or algebra or whatever. And they say, well, it's going to help you with critical thinking. You'll learn how to think. Well, my sense is that we've really learned how to think very, very well. In fact, it's very hard to, sometimes we're plagued by our thoughts. And our thinking can get seriously deranged. Have you noticed? And it's coming at us 24/7 with very often a lot of different voices, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different contradictory views and opinions, and with a huge amount of emotional charge associated with it. So just holding all of that in awareness immediately allows for a new way to navigate or be free.